Let's talk about adding new episodes to your podcast in Transistor. I'm on the dashboard now under the episodes tab for my particular podcast, the WP Minute Plus. I'm going to click on new episode, and everything is pretty straightforward. Everything is really clean and easy to understand. You would give your podcast episode a title. What are you going to call it? This is what's going to show up in podcast players, Apple, Spotify, Google, other podcast directories. Then you would upload your audio file. You can see all the different file extensions that are compatible, MP4 movie up to 1 gigabyte in size or 1,000 megabytes in size. The author, so this is going to default to your author name inside of your account dashboard or your settings for the podcast. But if you need to change it for whatever reason, you can just write a new one in there. Keywords. I don't particularly know if this is really still a thing these days, but you can add some keywords for the podcast episode, and different apps and different distribution points will show them and display them, or at least potentially use them in the algorithm. And I believe it does show up in the RSS feed as well, so it can't hurt to give some keywords to a particular episode. You can define an episode type. Normal, trailer, bonus, pretty self-explanatory, and if you hover over the question marks, it'll explain it a little bit more. 99.999% of the time, you're going to be uploading a normal show, unless it's a bonus show. Maybe you're doing a weekly episode, and then all of a sudden you throw in a second episode for the week. You might mark it as bonus. And of course, trailer is, hey, is there a new season coming? Is this a brand new podcast? And you want to upload a trailer episode. And basically what will happen is certain directories, certain podcast apps will display the trailer, and the Transistor website will display the trailer first, and maybe give it some, just a different flair of design. Like maybe it's highlighted a little bit more, maybe it's in bold text or it's outlined or something like that. So trailer is, very seldomly will use that except for launching a new show. You can give it an episode number. The great thing is Transistor just moves that number up for you, so you never really have to type it in unless for whatever reason you need to override that. You can give the particular show its own artwork. It'll default to your cover art, but if you have a particular episode image, maybe it's the person you interviewed, maybe it's the place that you visited in this episode, you can upload a unique image right here just for that episode. Scrolling down a little bit more, we have episode show notes or description. You can add things in here like, hey, summarize the show, entice somebody to, listen to the show, especially if the episode gets shared, or, somebody stumbles upon your episodes as they're searching for a particular topic. You don't have to write leagues of text, but having something that entices someone to click and listen. And then, of course, all of the important stuff that happens inside of the episode. So important links that you mentioned, destinations, books, different things that are going to be of relevance to the listener, that they're going to want to go back and use your show notes as a resource. Oh, what was that book they talked about? What was that website they mentioned? Make sure you have that in your show notes. Transistor allows you to do some fun things like these tags. So you can just pull in information here, like chapters that are in the MP3 file. If you do things like have a dynamic ending or show notes, you can add these tags in here. If you have a donation URL configured in your podcast settings, just simply adding this tag in here will just automatically put it in every time you publish an episode. That way you don't have to remember the whole URL or the whole link. You can do that here. Alternate episode URL. So if you wanted to say, hey, this podcast episode isn't at my Transistor website, it's somewhere else, you can override that here. So that's a great way to add that link into the podcast apps that actually display the links, for your podcast episode. Episode contains explicit content. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You can check that off if that episode does. The episode transcript, this doesn't show up until the podcast is actually published and saved. And then you would come back here and add the transcript for your podcast episode. So just to show you what that looks like, we'll go to my Transistor website here, and the transcript shows up right here. So I copy and paste that transcript into a text field, and then that'll show up on my podcast website. If you're using an SRT file, most Podcast 2.0 apps that support transcripts will actually display transcripts right inside the podcast app, which is very important for accessibility, for usability. Again, using your show notes and your transcript as a resource for a listener. It's great that all the Podcasting 2.0 tags that help with that initiative, that they're being developed. So that's great stuff. People, assign people to an individual episode. This is one that I haven't done yet, in all honesty, but I'm going to set that up because as Podcasting 2.0 apps become much more feature rich, it can display the people that that guest hosted on the podcast, certainly my bio, a link to my social media. So filling that out and adding that is only going to help with the shareability. And again, using your notes and resources to improve the listener experience. You can publish it right now or schedule a podcast to go out at a particular time. Again, that's very self-explanatory. And then when you're ready to go, you can either save it as a draft if you have to come back and work on it a little bit later, or just hit save and publish, and that'll publish your episode. So pretty straightforward at Transistor. Again, I find it really easy to use. And then once you're published, I'm just going to leave this. You can always grab an embed of your podcast with either a podcast list, a whole player that has all of the podcasts that people can listen to. I can go light theme, dark theme, or I can pull the most recent episode iframe. And this will go, you can use this on your website. So if you have, a community website and you want to put the most recent episode right on the homepage of your site, you can grab this iframe and embed that on any website. So it doesn't have to be WordPress. It doesn't have to be specific. It doesn't matter what you're using. Anything that supports an embed with an iframe, which is almost every content management system these days, you can do that or grab the embed for the particular show. So really easy to publish and distribute podcasts here at Transistor. If you like what you saw in today's video and you want to sign up with Transistor or test it out in the 14-day free trial, go ahead and use the link in the description. If you end up signing up, it helps me earn a little bit, enough to buy a cup of coffee to help support the channel and to help support the podcast setup at thepodcastsetup.com. It's a weekly newsletter for podcasters to discover other podcasters and check out their podcast setup, what microphones they're using, what software they're using, and to learn a little bit more about them as a podcaster, why they started their podcast. You too can sign up and get interviewed for free. Go to the podcast setup and check out the links there. It's free promotion. It's a great way to learn and discover from other podcasters, but to also get your podcast in front of a new audience. Check it out. Free newsletter every week, thepodcastsetup.com.